Thank you very much, and good evening. I'm not feeling very confident really about addressing the issues of most immediate concern to this community, particularly things like the tragic flood. And as you heard in the introduction, I'm an old counter-terrorist guy who is focused on things like national security issues. I'll be very brief. I just want to depict a little bit how most Americans view Pakistan and issues close to the ones that you're most concerned with. And if I'm adding any value, it's simply to help you understand what you're up against in trying to get attention for the particular issues of most concern to you. If you look at how the United States has viewed Pakistan through the years, there has been a strong tendency to try to fit it into the particular Cold War and other issues that have been concerned to the United States through the years. You go back to the days of Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, for example, and where did Pakistan figure in? It was things like President Yahya Khan assisting in the secret initiative to China, and then viewing Pakistan and India in Cold War terms. Today, of course, the overwhelming concern is with issues of international terrorism and issues related to the counterinsurgency that the United States and its allies are waging next door in Afghanistan. And this means, to the extent that there is a specific geographic focus of American political and strategic thinkers in Pakistan, it's the Northwest. And Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, I'm still calling it the Northwest Frontier Province, and the federally administered tribal areas. The American perspective, unfortunately, is very narrow, and I think part of your mission, and the mission of those you can talk to in Congress, is to try to expand that narrow perspective. It's not just the Northwest, it's not just terrorism, and it's not just the Punjabis in Islamabad, with whom American officials are most accustomed to dealing, because they're dealing with the Pakistani national government on these security issues, in which, of course, the counterparts, particularly the Pakistani military, are their most familiar interlocutors. Geographically, these concerns focused on counterterrorism do sometimes, however, get down to the portion of Pakistan that you are most interested in, at least in Baluchistan. You have Quetta, of course, as the home of the Quetta Shura, which is seen as the primary part of the Afghan Taliban that has been defined as the enemy of the U.S.-led coalition in Afghanistan. I think there are several ways in which I would like to see, and this is again part of your task, the focus of American security-related concern about Pakistan to be broadened in terms of issues. It's not just counterterrorism, and indeed the tragedy of the flood is, in ways that I won't take time to spell out, a security issue as well as a humanitarian issue. And then even if you are talking about counterterrorism, it's not just the now renamed Northwest Frontier Province, or the FATA. Karachi is a locale of high importance to this topic. Americans tend to think about camps in the hinterland, and out there in the Northwest or across the border in Afghanistan. Well, in fact, most of the preparations and the planning and the activity that we're most concerned with these days goes ahead in cities, including Western cities. But here in Pakistan, probably Karachi is the one that would be the main source of concern. And not just terrorism that affects the United States, but might I add that the Lashkar-e-Taiba activities, including the awful massacre of Mumbai, those terrorists sailed from Karachi, and they were partly controlled by cell phone from operatives in Karachi as well as in Lahore. And then finally, you've got the indirect security effects of anything, including what is happening in Sindh, that is a source of worry or concern or potential instability, even in the eyes of Punjabis in Islamabad. If people are unhappy, if people are restive, whether it's because of tragedies like the flood or issues of political representation, that is one more reason that the U.S. interlocutors in Islamabad will feel less able to take the sorts of risks and take the sorts of initiatives in fighting the Taliban in the Northwest, that sort of thing, that we would like to see them take. So, whether most Americans, even educated Americans, realize it or not, things that happen in Sindh have at least that indirect effect on what is on U.S. policymakers' plates in terms of dealing with Islamabad. So I will just close on the thought that you have your work cut out for you with regard to trying to call attention to these issues. And I would commend you for performing basically a service in trying to educate the Congress and those who have some kind of influence on American policy to the fact that Pakistan is not a unitary whole, that it is a country that consists of different groups, including Sindhi and Blue, and that we have to look beyond the immediate terrorist concerns in the Northwest to understand what's of importance not only to Pakistanis but also ultimately to the United States. So I thank you and wish you well in your mission.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Keller. I'd like now to introduce Ms. Malal Innocent from Cato Institute. Ms. Innocent is a foreign policy analyst. She is the member of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and her primary research interests include Middle East and Persian Gulf security issues, as well as U.S. foreign policy towards Pakistan. Malal has, towards Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China. She has appeared as a guest analyst on CNN, BBC News, Fox News Channel, Al Jazeera TV, Voice of America, CNBC Asia, and Reuters. Innocent has published reviews and articles on national security and international affairs in journals such as Survival, Congressional Quarterly, The Wall Street Journal Asia, Christian Science, and the Harvard International Review. She has written in outlets both in the U.S. and overseas, making her an expert on these issues. We welcome her opinions and thoughts, and we are so thrilled to have her here. Thank you, Susan.
I'd like to thank the Sindhi American Political Action Committee for inviting me here to speak. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight. It is both an honor and a privilege to be speaking with you here today. When I step back and take a 30,000-foot view of U.S.-Pakistan relations, it's apparent that policymakers both in Washington and in Islamabad are worlds apart. The United States and Pakistan are not divided by the obvious features, such as geographic distance, historical circumstance, or even cultural traditions and religious practice. The two countries remain divided in terms of something much simpler. Policymakers, particularly those in the West, lack experiential awareness and understanding of the various ways of being and meaning that give individual and collective identities within Pakistan actual true meaning to their lives. The West overlooks the underlying dynamism of Pakistan's cultural pluralism, of Pashtuns, Sindhis, Baluchis, and a smattering of smaller ethnic groups. But U.S. policymakers have also failed to understand that over the decades, their policies have helped to strengthen a Pakistani government designed to serve the needs of those in power. A critical examination of the U.S.-Pakistan partnership reveals that U.S. policymakers radically overestimated the leverage that foreign patronage would have over the social and political conditions of the subcontinent. Since the end of World War II to the terrorist attacks of 9/11, American policymakers have focused primarily on the Islamic Republic's civilian and military establishments, which are largely composed of folks from northern and central areas of the largest province, Punjab. This military and civilian complex has governed by striking deals and arrangements with various power centers and ethnic minorities. Thus, rather than recognize the reality of disparate communities living within a multi-ethnic state, American leaders, as a matter of political expediency, have frequently accepted the ascension of particular political parties or of single political figures as the linchpin of their policies. After all, coordinating issues of military intelligence and operational and tactical level planning is much simpler when done with a single authoritarian leader or through the elites of a dynastic political party, rather than with the warring factions of a dysfunctional parliament. But over the years, America's support for Pakistan's autocratic military rulers and corrupt semi-feudal elite gave the appearance that U.S. policymakers also embraced the silencing of Pakistani citizens. With these deeper issues of nationhood, ethnic domination, and centralized governance resonating with the Pakistani people, ethnic minorities began to believe that their political independence at home was being denied by political pressures from Washington. The gross irony is that the United States, despite having the world's oldest federal constitution at home, has consistently preferred all-powerful strongmen abroad. This preference entails an implicit denial of multi-ethnic communities, much less the myriad divisions within each ethnic group. In Pakistan, because the rules of the game are written in a way that cuts ethnic communities such as Sindhis and Baluchis out of the loop, and because governing elites don't have to live under the laws that they impose on the rest of their people, this top-down model has led to an ever-widening gap between Pakistanis who want to govern themselves and politicians who want to rule over them. Aggravated by historical antagonisms and a profound sense of social and economic injustice, this dynamic has fueled anger and secessionist movements. These realities are part of what can only be described as something of a dual consciousness that currently pervades the Pakistani psyche. On the one hand is the pang of resentment and betrayal over governing elites in Islamabad and their failure to respond to the demands of their people. And on the other is a deep sense of pride in Pakistanis of witnessing their fellow citizens resist and overcome the onslaught of their weak and misgoverned country's many self-inflicted wounds. From energy scarcity and the maldistribution of basic resources, to poor civil sector governance reform and the powerful jihadist insurgency. U.S. policymakers are still struggling to grasp Pakistan's complex issues of ideas, ideologies, and identities. But meanwhile, Sindhis and other ethnic minorities are continuing to live their lives and progress as a people, which means that U.S. policymakers are continually falling behind in their attempts to keep up. As a result, such multidimensional issues of Pakistan are often weighed down by hasty generalizations and counterproductive misconceptions of a country on the brink of collapse. Indeed, as early as Pakistan expert Keith Callard notes, quote, many foreign observers in 1947 had the greatest doubts about the viability of the new state, especially about its capacity for self-government, unquote. That statement was made in 1957. Experts throughout the years essentially thought that Pakistan would not survive, and that is still the conventional wisdom today. But Pakistan has survived, and policymakers cannot understand why. After 63 years, what are foreign observers to make of Pakistan's dysfunctional resiliency? How has a country devastated by exceptionally unfavorable circumstances been able to continually defy the odds of its critics? What U.S. policymakers do not understand is that the strength of Pakistan lies not with its government, but with its people. America's problem lies in its over-reliance of Pakistan's centralization, because with it comes the personalization of power and a heavy reliance on bureaucratic structures. Of course, such top-heavy administrations remain ineffective and dilapidated, while the personalities America supports are often corrupted and compromised. American policymakers will never understand the power of the human element until they tear down their simplistic characterizations that perpetuate Pakistan's debilitating lack of empowerment. Governments derive just powers from the consent of the governed, not the other way around. People should rule their rulers. And a passage applicable to all countries facing internal constraints, Cuban dissident Leone Sanchez writes, quote, there is no value in having laws that guarantee the freedom to work, to education, to health care, and to equality, if it is not possible to protest the failure to uphold these laws, and if people are not allowed to organize in a civilized way to demand that they be respected, unquote. The question we must ask ourselves here tonight are, do the multiplicity of ethnic and linguistic groups within Pakistan feel secure enough to cooperate with other ethnic minorities toward a common sense of purpose? Does the desire to amalgamate with co-ethnics in neighboring countries outweigh the negative consequences of disunion brought up by internal disintegration? More importantly, is America willing to assist the plight of ethnic minorities at the expense of policies that favor one ethnic group over others? American lawmakers must look beyond the Pakistani government and become more aware of the talents of its people. This is where groups like the Sindhi American Political Action Committee can help. Sept helps inform American leaders about the political and economic rights violations of Sindhis, and helps raise public awareness of traditional Sindhi language and culture. Certainly, we need sober and comprehensive appraisal of Pakistan's problems, but that must be accompanied by realistic and achievable policy solutions for alleviating the country's deep-seated structural problems, all of which flow from a deeper understanding of its people and heritage. Amid these times of tremendous uncertainty, Cindy's need lucid, compelling, and empirically supported policy recommendations to secure effective governance and demand for the government's obligation to provide goods and services to its people. America should encourage Pakistan's leaders to implement the provisional autonomy provision in the 1973 Constitution and put an end to the economic exploitation of Sindh by bringing about a more equitable distribution of tax revenues and government resources. Additionally, U.S. leaders must understand that Sindhis and all groups within Pakistan need trade, not aid. The true cause of Pakistan's poverty is the country's long history of crippling misgovernance, a problem that is exacerbated by rich countries' trade protectionism, particularly with respect to agriculture and cotton and textile industries. Per acre, American cotton farmers are treated to subsidies 5 to 6 times as high as those for corn, soybeans, and wheat. These protectionist measures harm Pakistani apparel imports and the ability of U.S. firms and factories to stay open in Pakistan. Sept can do a lot to push back against textile protectionism by speaking to those in the United States who craft, administer, and interpret these regulations, such as Departments of Agriculture, Treasury, and Commerce. U.S. tariffs and quotas and export subsidies exacerbate poverty in regions like South Asia, where people are heavily dependent upon agriculture and textile manufacturing. The United States also must address the problem of foreign aid. Certainly, aid can be beneficial, but it fails to stimulate economic growth because it's often based on geopolitical considerations, not economic criteria. What's more, aid dollars are stolen by corrupt leaders and transferred back to Western bank accounts. In short, American leaders must begin to understand and appreciate how its policy impact ethnic minorities within Pakistan and work toward eliminating market-distorting trade policies. With groups like Sept, together we can help to alleviate poverty and protect the rights of minority groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will wait to introduce our next speaker for the next 2 minutes as we start serving the dinner, but then we will have our esteemed speaker, Dr. Ashoka Bandraj, just to let you all know. But we do have dinner coming out right now, and in case you were not aware of it when you first walked in, we do have notepads and pens in the back, in the corner. If you're at all interested in taking notes of any of these wonderful presentations, those are available for you, and now would be an ideal time to get it while we're bringing out the dinner. Thank you.
diasporas and peace building, so on and so forth. But this represents, to me, an opportunity to learn about Sindh and perhaps to get more involved in understanding the developments in the Sindh and incorporate that into my ongoing work. And on a personal note, I should say, growing up in Sri Lanka, when we thought of the Sindh, we always thought of it as the seat of the Mohenjo-Daro Harappa civilization. That's what we learned in the textbooks, and we always looked to that as a seat where South Asian culture originated and the best of it. And subsequently, looking at the colonial history, we were taught that the very name for the subcontinent India actually came from the Sindhu. So there was, although we were in the far south, there was this sense of connection. And not only just in terms of the history books, but also in terms of people and communities. Some of my closest friends came from the Sindhi community because we have a small Sindhi community in Sri Lanka. The Chandanis, the Hyderamanis, a very well-to-do business community that came and settled in Sri Lanka. And we thought of the culture as a gentle culture with a very strong Sufi tradition. That has been our understanding of the Sindh and that area of the subcontinent. But like many other parts of South Asia and the rest of the world, over time, things have become much more complicated and contradictory. And in terms of the Sindh, one aspect of it is the increasing diversity and differentiation. And another is this contradiction. On the one hand, the Sindh is considered the richest of the provinces in Pakistan, with access to incredible natural resources of gas and oil and coal, so on and so forth. But on the other hand, it is one of the poorest and considered to be one of the more backward provinces. And this contradiction is not just peculiar to the Sindh or regions of South Asia, as you know. If you look at even, say, many African nations, for example, the sub-Saharan Africa, some of the richest regions in terms of natural resources are there. But at the same time, in terms of human development and poverty indices, there are some of the most backward areas in the world. This is not the place for us to ponder why this contradiction exists. On the one hand, this richness in terms of resources, and on the other hand, this backwardness in terms of income and human development. Another, and this is very clear in terms of education and the large numbers of people, who fall below the poverty level of, earning $2 a day. And also the diversity in the Sindh is something that is often overlooked. Sindh, as compared to some of the other provinces, has one of the largest population of the so-called linguistic and religious minorities in Pakistan, which gives it again a greater complexity than some of the other provinces. And of course, the persistence of some of the feudal traditions, the landlord-serf relations, has also added another dimension that needs to be taken into account in addressing these issues of poverty, so on and so forth. And with regard to this is the position of women. And one that really comes to mind is the continuation of the terrible tradition of honor killings, which still is practiced in the Sindh. The situation in the Sindh is much more complex, just as it is in much of the rest of South Asia and the rest of the world, so that any kind of a policy from external intervention needs to take into account these intra-ethnic, intra-regional complexities. But I think that the floods, these terribly devastating floods, and the long-term implications of that provide an opportunity to really look at these issues in a deeper way. There are reports in the media that some of the rich landlords and the politicians are diverting water away from their land, the flood waters, that they're pocketing some of the aid that is coming in, and that this could lead to exacerbation of tensions further in the future. But I think there are also other reports that are often